1985 Honda Shadow looks like, and it's a Honda Shadow that works really well, and it's so surprising. I've ridden so many motorcycles, and the funny thing is that this Shadow still rides as if it's almost brand new. The motor and the transmission are tight. You can still even hear that newness of that engine. It's incredible. The quality of 1985 Honda was much more superior to Hondas of today. So up front you have a 19-inch front wheel with twin discs. This 1985 Honda Shadow had a front wheel like this. It's the same size as a Suzuki V-Strom 650. Also has pretty decent brakes for a cruiser with two discs up front in the front wheel. The rear wheel uses drum brakes. This one is equipped with highway bars, so you can put your feet up like this as you're cruising around. The way you sit on this, you have your feet actually at an angle. It seems it's almost like 90 degrees, but it's really not. You do sit with your knees much higher up than most bikes. On this V-twin, accessibility to the spark plugs is super simple. It doesn't get easier than this for removing the spark plugs. There's a spark plug here, another spark plug on the other side, and then another one here, and then another one on the other side. This is actually one of the more interesting things about this bike. I do like that it's a single headlight unit, but this is made out of glass. And if you've noticed a lot of motorcycles and cars these days, this has become plastic. But since this is from 1985, it's still using good glass. And of course, you know, it's rusting a little bit, but it's very old. It's a 35-year-old bike, but it's still running perfectly in 2020. And that goes a lot to say about these Honda Shadows. These are the very large stock blinkers that Honda has. They're not working at the moment. Twin horns, and of course you have the nice emblem here. This actually comes off. It's like a chrome piece that kind of you can remove so you can access the brake lines. The master cylinder, the glass, what happens over time is that this will completely fall off and disintegrate because it's just a piece of glass. You could get like a couple of these to fix. The way I fixed it, I just put a 10-cent coin in there, and 10-cent coins work really well. And then I put some epoxy glass counter liquid, and that sealed it up. So you're not going to be able to see the sight, but it is kind of cool to see a coin in there. This one, I did have to renew the clutch line, and this is it's a simple clutch line from China. It was actually $10, so you could get the equivalent clutch line for about $100 from Spiegler or Galfer. Shaft drive. And a lot of these old bikes, cruisers and even standards that Honda, Kawasaki and Yamaha were making, use shaft drives. It's got twin rear shocks, and these shocks are so much easier to service than most bikes, because most bikes have a monoshock in the rear or one shock that controls the bike. They didn't skip out on the chrome in this bike. Of course, with age, this chrome has seen better days, but it still works fairly well. This one does have a rear passenger pegs along with some highway pegs for your passenger. Radiator filler is right here. It's kind of a bad design in a way because you have to remove this plastic cover to access this. That means you have to kind of pull back the gas tank a little bit. I wish that Honda would put it a little bit off to the side. I think they were trying to design it to look a little bit more streamlined. On the left side you have your clutch, which is an hydraulic clutch, of course, and then you have your high beam and low beam. You have your turn signals, and then you push in to cancel, and then of course you have your horn down here. Very typical of Honda. And of course you do have another thing, which is your choke here. Very simple dials, and of course the right side you just have your tachometer, and it revs out at 8,000. That's when it hits red line, and then you have the temperature gauge. This is a water-cooled bike, which is from 1985, and it's kind of unique in its own. And of course what you have here are your dummy lights. This is a very simple thing. It's not fancy. They made it look very fancy. There's fuses under here which control the headlight, turn signals, tail light, and everything. Kind of a bad engineered thing to have fuses underneath and bulbs, but bulbs I can understand. When you turn it on, you can see they just kind of magnify the lights. Not only is this a very small gas tank, it's more of just, it holds just a little bit. Most of the gas actually goes to the bottom gas tank. That's right, there are two gas tanks. You fill it here and then it trickles down, goes underneath here. The main tank is actually down here. That's why you can't gravity feed onto the carburetor the fuel, because it's very down low. On this right side you have your front brake master cylinder that was fixed, and of course you have your kill switch, and then you have your starter and your throttle, and then you have your brakes, of course. Now the seat is reasonably comfortable. You sit very close to the handlebars, which I'm not used to, but the seat itself, it's got this quilted sort of pattern that it's not being used anymore, but it's not broken, it's not torn. It feels very comfortable. For me, after a while, since I'm used to the lean forward position of motorcycles, after a while it does kind of get to me, but I'm just not used to riding these cruiser bikes. I have the rear passenger tail seat, but I removed it because I do not like the sissy bar look of this bike. To remove the front seat, all you have to do is remove these two bolts, push it up, and slide it backwards. Side of the bike, you have a couple of things happening. Here you have your airbox. To access your airbox, there's two bolts, and you can just pull this out, and then the airbox element is inside there. You have another foot peg here. This wiring is not something I really recommend doing, but the relay was bypassed because it was bad, and a new fuel pump was added. That's an aftermarket fuel pump. This is the petcock, and you shut fuel this way, turn on the fuel this way. And right in here that you can't really see is the coolant bottle, and it's such a badly positioned bottle. I don't really care too much about the bottle. You could actually see the sight glass through here for the bottle, but if you need to fill it up, it's very difficult to twist it around because it hits the petcock. So this bike uses a dipstick to see if the oil level is good. I much prefer a sight glass, but this is the old school of doing things, so that's what we got. It's got an old school tail light. The rear tire is actually a 15-inch tire. It's a 140/90/15. This bike uses a rear drum brake. The ignition for the bike is right here. Use the same key, of course. Let's go ahead and start the bike. Time to see how this bike rides. So we are on board the Honda Shadow, 1985 Honda Shadow 700. That's the thing I didn't really say before, but it's a 700. It's otherwise called the Vt700. It's so funny, like this is a reliable, inexpensive Harley Davidson. And I think these old timers that ride these bikes, they're like, I don't want any of this fancy stuff like fuel gauges and fuel injection. To me, fuel injection is a great invention, because I have cleaned carburetors before, and they're a pain in the ass to clean. They really are. So, you know, filling this bike up, I think it's only like 3 gallons worth of gas, but the fuel goes from here to a bottom gas tank. And it's funny, like when you watch this sort of stuff, that's what Honda does on a lot of bikes. Even the NC700, they decided to put the gas tank further down. It doesn't really increase the power or reduce the weight, but it reduces the feel, and the feel the feeling of this bike having lower weight is quite evident with the gas tank being down there. Here's the downside of this bike. You see where my thighs are resting? It's actually like touching the exhaust here. I think it's missing something, a cover of some kind, but it gets pretty hot there. This motor is fantastic. The motor and transmission are flawless. From 1985, you would think that somehow this bike would be a little bit faultier, that perhaps it didn't ride as well, but it does ride well. It feels very tight. The motor doesn't burn oil, it doesn't use oil, it doesn't smoke. The transmission, there's no misses. This is typical of Honda. The engine and transmission are just amazing. And of course, Honda started out making motorcycles, so they have quite a bit of experience building great engines. Now keep in mind, when I talk about chassis, I am talking about frame and the way it kind of handles in the curves and stuff. And also keep in mind that I'm more of a sport bike guy, so I'm looking at it from a very different perspective than most guys would be looking at. But I do notice that the frame is very good. It's stiff, but yet plush at the same time. It kind of feels like a luxury car instead of a sports car. And it makes it very easy to ride around. But I think when I push it, if I push this bike a little bit in corners and stuff, there's a lot of flexing. But I think that's it wasn't meant for that sort of riding. It wasn't meant for corners. So in a way, I prefer bikes to be a little stiffer, because I can go around corners a little bit faster and a little bit better. So when it comes to handling, because of the handlebars, and you notice like I have very little position here from the handlebars to my leg, the handling is not great, but it wasn't meant for cornering. So it's a bike that was meant for casual riding and maybe even commuting. But I find that commuting around this area, I would definitely want something a little bit more sporty. A lot of it is like avoiding getting hit by cars in DC. So this bike with the strange handlebars that make it comfortable for riding casually, in a way are a problem when you're commuting in traffic in a big city. So I've looked at prices for Honda Shadows and everything varies. The funny thing is that 1980s Shadows like this hold their value just as well as the early 2000 Shadows. I think a lot of it has to do with the new retro movement of fixing up and changing motorcycles. People really enjoy these older bikes because they're very easy to work on, and they are. I mean, when you work on the carburetor on this, it's very simple, very easy to remove. Maintenance, it doesn't really need a lot, but you do have to pay attention to the things that go wrong on these bikes, because you do have a bike from the 1980s, and when it's like 30 years old, that means that you're gonna have to renew a lot of hoses. So if you buy one, make sure that the previous owner took care of it. Make sure that it was garaged, because you want one of these older bikes to be garaged. There's a lot less things that do break, because it stood outside for so long, it just broke. And all the hoses, fuel hoses, they're going to be needing replacements. All the air hoses, coolant hoses. There's a lot of expense that comes from the initial buying of an old 80s Honda. But I think it's very rewarding to ride something this old. You know, like I keep telling myself that I'm riding a 35-year-old motorcycle. That's really incredible. And it's just like a little time capsule. Listen to that pull. It's actually really fast when you consider it's a 1980s bike. And this bike is quiet too. When you start moving, of course, it does liven up quite a bit because of the V-twin, but very quiet. I don't know if it's everybody's taste to have a quiet bike. Well guys, that's what a 1985 Honda Shadow looks like. And it's a Honda Shadow that works really well. And it's so surprising. I've ridden so many motorcycles, and the funny thing is that this Shadow still rides as if it's almost brand new. The motor and the transmission are tight. You can still even hear that newness of that engine. It's incredible. The quality of 1985 Honda was much more superior to Hondas of today. I've had quite a bit of my share of Hondas, and I was always a little bit surprised about the quality. And now that I look at the Shadow, I start to understand why Honda's got such a good reputation. And they built it in the 1980s with bikes like this, and the Honda Dream and the Honda Cub. All of those have great fit and finish. They're super reliable. And it's the same thing with this Honda Shadow. It's just one of the better bikes you can get. And of course, the prices for these vary, but you can get one of these for about $1,000 to $2,000 depending on how well it was maintained. Well guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.